participated in our online training. So let me just briefly walk you through our previous webinars. We are, as I said, we have done 16 webinars so far, and today's our webinar number 17. The recordings of all our webinars can be found on our IFC healthcare tool page. And over there, you can see them as presentations so that you can download them in parts and it's easier for you to see. So we did hold a number of webinars on quality and patient safety. For a while, we delivered several webinars on COVID-19 response, and then continued our series of healthcare quality issues. We ran a few specific webinars like quality in radiology and quality in laboratory. And the last webinar of August related to implementing policies and procedures. And then the previous one in June was about creating policies and procedures. So the recording of our webinars can be available on our webpage, as I said. So this is an image that you will see when you're trying to access our ALQ healthcare webpage. You may have a question, how do I get to that page? I mean, how do I find the link? If you've connected to this webinar, or for those who registered for the webinar but either could not connect or connected later, we will be sending a link to this web page in our follow-up emails. Now, our follow-up emails will also have information and all the slides as shown during today's webinar. So if you have a question, will I be receiving the slides? Yes, you will be receiving the slides together with our email with all the useful links and all the resources. And please expect it tomorrow. We may not be able to finalize the emailing today, but be sure that you will receive it tomorrow. So this is the link to our IQ healthcare webpage. Over here, you will see the announcements, you will see the news, the events, the information that you can use for your facility or for your personal career. Everything is there. Now, we do have additional page that's dedicated directly to webinars and trainings. And because we had so many webinars, we allocated a separate page for them. And now what's new that's featuring on that web page? It's not only webinars anymore. Our team created a number of online trainings, and 4 of them are already out and can be accessed and can be completed on IFC's Open Learning Campus, OLC. And here is the link to this resource, and this is how the resource looks. If you go to search, and you can search for one of our 4 topics here, and you will be able to access one of our courses. Now, we have courses available so far on hand hygiene, on patient isolation, on patient identification, and on false safety. What's interesting about those courses is that you can receive a certificate of attendance. We often receive questions during the webinar and after the webinar. Can I get a certificate? Unfortunately, it's not possible certificates of attendance for our webinars, but you will be receiving certificates of completion for each of the courses that you complete on the Open Learning Campus. Now, there is one requirement. In order to receive your certificate, you need to evaluate the course. Now, this is not the requirement that we have. This is the requirement that the World Bank system has. So we realize that you need additional time to do that, but this is a pre-requirement. We also learned from you as our participants that in about 1% of cases, certificate generation can go not so smoothly. And sometimes, especially when you register twice for the same course, or something happened, the connection was not stable during the registration, sometimes the certificate may not be generated. Now, this can be corrected. If you write to us, we will get in touch with the Open Learning Campus support team, and they will check everything on their end, and they will verify. And if everything is okay, they will send us your certificate, and we will forward it to you. So don't be afraid to contact us and tell us about any problems that you have with the certificates, and also about any feedback that you have after completing those courses. Now, those are online courses. They are free. They can be completed as you go. It's self-paced. So you can start, you can save, and then you can continue, and then you can complete. So you're welcome to use this additional resource. We will be adding more courses in October, and we will announce it separately. Also, we announce our courses in our Facebook group. This is a closed group called IFC Healthcare Quality Community of Practice. Now, this is a closed group because we don't want any soliciting, we don't want any unwanted ads or something like that. So this is a community of practitioners. And please, if you find it on the Facebook and you'd like to join, just send us a request, join the group, and you'll be in the group. We also have a YouTube channel that we use for broadcasting our events like the one today, and also for storing videos there. Now, videos are available immediately, but they are uncut. So if it's a longer video that you can access online, but if you, let's say, you want a separate presentation, you don't want to watch everything, then you would go to our webpage where you can where you can access the recordings by presentation. And once again, about the useful functions in Zoom. We have a chat function, and you can see it at the bottom of the screen. When you press this button, it opens right here, and there is a field, and you can chat your questions, you can chat your comments, you can write your comments, you can write any feedback that you want. We monitor it as we go. I mean, we monitor it in real time, and we respond in real time. Also, for your questions, for the specific questions that you'd like to be answered during the webinar, and those are not technical questions, but the questions to our speakers, we encourage you to use the Q&A function. When you press on the icon that's circled, then it opens a question and answer field, and then your question, you will be able to type your question, and we will be able to answer it directly in this chat. Also, for our French-speaking colleagues, we do have French interpretation. This is the button Interpretation, and we can have French. You can listen to our webinar in French. Now, we are doing our best to allow our interpreters that have been with us for a long time now to interpret everything, but I'd like to remind now to all my colleagues and our participants that the slower and clearer we speak, then the better quality translation our participants, our French-speaking participants will get. So let's keep in mind this. At the end of the webinar, we do request your feedback. As again, I always tell, it's important. It's really important to us to hear whatever you have to say. You can say what you liked. You can tell us what you didn't like. You can tell us what you lacked during the webinar. Everything. So when the webinar is completed, before signing out, you have 3 questions to answer, and there is a field to type your comments. Or tomorrow, when you receive the slides, there will be a link to generate a simple email saying, I'm satisfied. And of course, you can only generate this one line, I'm satisfied, in the email, or you can type any comments that you would like us to know in that email. And we really, really, really appreciate it. You can even consider it, you know, and you can even consider it, you know, a participation fee, because we don't charge fee, but we charge feedback. Let's put it this way. So today's webinar is to rebuild or not to rebuild. And we are talking about effective ways to address infrastructure gaps. And I'm passing the floor over to Julia, our specialist, our moderator. And Julia, welcome.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for this nice introduction. Thanks a lot. I hope this is super helpful for all our participants who are joining for the first time, or those who forgot how to post their questions, because it's very important. And welcome to IFC's series of webinars. We're happy to see you always. And today we are going to discuss a very tricky subject, actually. So those hospitals that are greenfield, recently built, for them, it seems it's very easy to make their patients safer and their staff safer. And what if the hospital is not built recently? What if the facility was designed in the 19th century or in the middle of the 20th century? What if the facility has fragmented layout? So in order to go from one ward to another department, you need to go out. I have seen facilities that had to transfer patients from the wards for the diagnostic and the X-ray going out into the street and crossing the road. So all these challenges, like one elevator, not enough staircases, are these obstacles? Is it difficult for these facilities to make to improve their quality and patient safety? Or maybe they shouldn't even start if they have such infrastructure challenges. That's the question we are getting from the hospitals all around the world, because such challenges exist in every country. So today we are going to discuss these issues. How to improve the infrastructure, where it's possible to compensate by processes, and we will look at the examples that our speakers will provide, where it's better to invest and not to cut corners because risks are too high, in which areas, in which departments. And of course, you will have wonderful chance to access knowledge of our experts by asking the questions which are specific for your situation during our question and answer session. And our first speaker today is Dr. Sachin Wag from India, a specialist in the hospital design and hospital layout. Dr. Sachin, you're welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia. I'll share my screen. Can you please make me the co-host? Yeah.
You are?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from whichever part of the world you're joining in. I'm Dr. Sachin Wag, medical planner and hospital design principal at Strategic Knowledge Solution based in Mumbai, India. We consult clients on planning and designing of hospitals, both greenfield as well as renovation projects, and we covered a wide spectrum of clients both nationally and internationally. Now, being the first speaker today, my task is principally to highlight the importance of infrastructure and sort of sensitize the participants on infrastructure relationship with quality. As we understand, the genesis of this webinar, as explained by Yana and Julia, during our discussions, is that while they're consulting the healthcare facilities in developing and underdeveloped countries, the common feedback that IFC usually gets is that the infrastructure is the biggest obstacle for accreditation, which somehow I feel is an oxymoron in itself, because infrastructure is an enabler of quality. It facilitates and supports to the maximum extent so that the caregivers can focus on their core competency of real-time patient care at the bedside. To get a perspective, infrastructure is like your computer hardware, and the operations are the software. Obviously, your performance gets adversely affected if the hardware is compromised and not compatible with your operations. Coming to accreditation, now by definition, accreditation is voluntary, which means it is optional. But quality is not. There is nothing like bad healthcare. Again, by definition, healthcare has to be good. Premium non nocere. Now, that's the Latin words for medical slogan, first do no harm. A fundamental medical precept by Hippocrates. Why are we discussing this? We discuss this because this is preventable, be it the injury or the fall, the medical error or the surgical error, or even the hospital-acquired infection. If we put in that extra effort, these all things are preventable. And it is heartening to know that organizations are looking forward towards accreditation, towards quality improvement, and this is a very positive step to confirm the promoter and the management commitment to improvement. Basically, in recent years, what I've seen in India, that we have seen a revolution in healthcare quality. The NABH and the NQAS, which is the equivalent for government facilities, are the national accreditations for healthcare facilities, and they have made quantum leap in respect to sensitization and establishment of need and modalities to achieve quality in healthcare. Accreditation basically gives you an opportunity to set the things right, and so that you can do the right things. So basically put your house in order in the literal sense. And there are many issues one wouldn't have had known otherwise that are highlighted by the gap analysis. Let me quickly run you through what are the components of hospital infrastructure. So basically, you would have the building on one end, which has the, definitely the internal layout, extending into the interiors part of it in terms of finishes. Then the engineering services in terms of your HVAC, electrical, plumbing, firefighting, your extra low voltages in terms of your Wi-Fi system, CCTV, BMS, access control, and your IT system, definitely. Medical equipment and furniture, which is more or less standardized, and also the medical services in terms of medical gases, pneumatic tubes, your nurse call systems. Now, what happens during the project phase? Let me give you a brief understanding of that. How we start a project. The first and foremost thing, like in all management textbooks, the first subject that they teach is principles of management, and the first chapter is, what are the functions of a manager. And the first function of a manager is to plan. So before getting the drawing board or even trying to do the sketching, what is to be built has to be first put in text. This is what we call as a conceptualization, which is a result of an feasibility study. It could either be, what is the target patients that you're looking at, what are the specialties you want to provide, what is the service mix, what are the facilities that you want to provide, like dialysis, endoscopy, how many OTs you would want to have, maybe procedure rooms and things like that. Extending into the bed mix, how many single rooms, twin sharings, or multi-beds, or maybe even the types of ICUs that one would want to have. And there has to be a proper balance between the volumetric analysis, as in the space that is available with you, and also the budget that is available with you. Because quite a few times it happens that either due to ignorance or due to genuine underestimation, there is a mismatch. And that has quite a bit of catastrophic effects. Because once you start building the hospital, that is a point of no return. So has to be very cautious about, because everybody wants everything in a particular project. So what is the maximum that you can get as against, what is the optimum best fit for your particular facilities that you have to realize? And whether you want to experiment with your facility and the project, or you want to use experienced people, as so that you make less mistakes and you don't try to learn by trial and error method. Now, everybody in the healthcare design industry is aware of the dictum that the form follows function. But somehow this is true only for the design stage, which is probably 6 months or 1 year of that project life cycle. For the remaining of the 40, 50 years of existence of that hospital, the functions are going to follow the form. Yeah, operational stage, because let's example, the OPD consultation room is on the 3rd floor. Now it is going to remain on the 3rd floor for every consultation or for every episode. If the dirty utility is at the end of the corridor, it shall stay there for every call that the patient makes, for every shift, for every day, for perpetual basis. So beyond that, then we get into the streamlining of circulations, because hospitals predominantly are very complex, and it is only the circulations that are going to make life easy, both for the management as well as for the clinical and nursing staff. So we are all are aware about external circulations, the main entrance percolating into the main lobby, the retail pharmacy, registration billing, so on and so forth. Then you have separate accident emergency access, with lit signage, dedicated drop-off, dedicated parking, so on and so forth. Parking definitely important in today's day. I might make a decision of selecting a hospital purely based on parking. You never know. And staff also is very huge in number. For example, a 100-bed hospital will have 100 staff coming in and 100 staff going out at a particular shift changeover. So that's a big number. Added to that is the security frisking and maybe even your attendance system. Multiple stores in terms of say medicines, your consumables, your housekeeping items, and not to forget the services in terms of your kitchen or even your laundry. Very sensitive issue about mortuary for transportation of dead bodies, and also the waste management. Fire exits very important because safety is at paramount importance in today's day. These are the things that will ease in the life rather than being a mess if these things are not thought about in the design stage itself. This then percolates into the internal circulation. One of the biggest mistakes that people do is to fail to get any segregation between outpatient and visitors from the inpatient, accident, emergency, and the services. So that is something that one needs to focus more upon. That obviously your departmental sizes, adjacencies, and internal layouts. Infection control definitely very important. Everybody today is aware about the 3-zone stage of operation theaters. In fact, with IFC we did one more webinar, Safe Tool Safe Lives, Clean Tool Saves Life, because wherein we had an entire episode on the CSSD, and I predominantly spoke about the internal layout circulation. So probably if you're interested, you could look at that recorded session as well. And last but not the least, the fact they have to be sustainable, energy efficient. And let me point out here is that it is a myth that people think that energy efficient will also be operationally efficient, which is not. You have a lot of indicators which will actually make your facility operationally efficient, which will make you, not only save costs but also make more income and business from that point of view. Interiors, from interiors point of view, you have a wide spectrum of facilities existing all over. There are facilities which employ evidence-based design, that employs positive abstraction in terms of light, the windows, the vision for that matter, natural light as well as artificial light. Again, color combinations, acoustics, again extending into even smell or essence for that matter. Okay. Again, percolating into comfort and safety. That is at one end. And at the other end, you have facilities which are actually struggling even to give the basic facilities, or even to provide you have some windows opening into the courtyard and things like that. So there is some compromise on that level. Again, talking about finishes, from infection control point of view and maintenance, they have to be easily cleanable. The walls, the ceilings, the level floorings and things of that sort. What we have seen is neglected in most of the projects, and which is very important to be highlighted here, is the functional spaces that are required for the nurse station, the medicine preparation, clean and dirty utility. And I must point out, and I must, in fact, appreciate the nursing staff and the support staff that still manage to provide, the basic minimum care that is required, even in the shortage of space, because if you talk about nursing station, one would typically one would actually have around 300 items to be stored in a nurse station, and not to forget about the counter space that is required for staff. So one would basically have a front counter with computers, printers, intercom, nurse call system console. Maybe have a double counter, in front of it, a back counter with inbuilt sink and swan neck outlet with elbow operator, a tab. Maybe you also have space for a sharp container. You have below counter storages for your consumables like your catheters and syringes. it would be ideal to have a room and bed-wise patient dashboard. You see it in quite a few places, but the space has to be there. Again, a whiteboard or a pin-up board to earmark which patients are for the OT, which patients are to be kept NBM, and which patients are for discharge. Things like that. Again, overhead cupboards for your narcotics with double locks, high alert drugs, your look-alike, sound-alike drugs, your vertical racks for registers. There are humongous functionalities that are required here. Otherwise, if the space is not there, like even the patient file rack is a basic necessity. So you need space for a fridge. You need space for your waste bins, X-ray view box, the crash card, very important, and not to forget the charging points for the defibrillator and the ECG within the crash card. A key box with the master key. So there are multiple requirements that are ignored. At this highly functional, and the devil is in the details. Mind you. And continuing with the other part is the MEP engineering services. Probably you'll spend 1/3 of your cost on the building, maybe 1/3 on the interiors, and 1/3 on the engineering MEP services. Now, your building and your interiors, by and large, are static. They are there, and it's just the use that would happen. But the engineering services I have to perform. They are dynamic, which essentially means that they have a wear and tear. This is an industry where we actually have backup of backup. So the reliability is very much high on these performances. So you have a very big thrust on preventive maintenance as well as your repairs and spares. There are equipment, high value equipment also, like cath lab, which requires conducive environments to perform optimally. It would require strict control of relative humidity for it to perform functionally well. So that again makes it important, and a compromise at this stage is going to be catastrophical. It's like putting 7 people in a 5-seater car. What would happen basically? The driver is comfortable, the passengers are uncomfortable, and the car is going to have the time. It's going to underperform. The efficiency, the fuel consumption is going to go high. Efficiency is going to come down, and it is going to conk off very frequently. So that is the load that would happen on your MEP engineering services at one end. And at the other end also, if you are providing a lot of engineering services, you are basically giving a lot of over specification, which is not required. So by and large, you require a proper value engineering at this stage, because your engineering services consume a lot of energy, and this is a hidden cost spread over a period of time. Very few management people would actually be able to identify this, where we actually know of hospitals where if we benchmark their energy consumption, it is at least 1.5 times of the benchmark. So that is something that, and the management is not even aware of that, because ultimately your profit is the expense taken out from the income. So either you increase your income or you decrease the expense, and this is the biggest cost that you can avoid at the project stage. Coming to regulations, which is also a very big requirement of quality of care. You have certifications, you have codes, you have no objections, you have guidelines, licenses, standards, approvals, registrations, you have models, you have marks, like you have a CE mark, you have a ISI mark or a BIS mark in India. We all sort of dislike standards, isn't it? Or we all sort of dislike regulations, which I think is a very skewed way of looking at things, because regulations actually they are prescriptive. They tell us exactly what to do, and they are required to keep us in limits. So much so to an extent that in India we need to have a law to make people wear helmets while they are riding their bikes. So the safety actually becomes an extension from the regulation. We all know about fire protection, the radiation safety guidelines that are there, electrical safety. Again, lot of protection from equipment related, like your ethylene oxide, which is a carcinogenic, or maybe the helium escape, or even the liquid medical oxygen, which may not be inflammable, but it is definitely combustible. And last but not the least, the magnetic safety, because we have had incidences where we have had metal projectiles leading to fatal injuries, and also to accidents wherein a pacemaker patient actually crosses the gauge line of the MRI. That will actually lead to failure of that particular pacemaker. So quite a catastrophic thing if these things are not taken into care. So regulation definitely are very important to keep us in control. We all know about the environmental impact of our hospitals, the water pollution that it causes, which is why the ATP and STP is definitely required. We should not compromise in this. Again, the smoke or the air quality, the smoke that is generated from the diesel generator or the kitchen or the boiler, let me give you an example. We audited one of the medical college hospitals some time back, and there was a high-speed diesel tank, and we inquired what the capacity of this tank. We were told it's 400 liters. So, but somehow you come to know that somebody is trying to cut corners. So later on, we found out that the capacity is more than 1,500, which is when we try to send the people that in case there is an accident tomorrow, there is no compromise. You will be behind bars, because there will definitely be an inquiry. It's like it's like an accident on the road. If the driver has a license, it remains as an accident. But if the driver doesn't have a license, it is a homicide. So that's the humongous difference between following the being within the regulatory limits. Biomedical waste is, if not managed well, definitely causes a lot of environmental impact. And not to forget the provisions that we keep for our differently abled people in terms of universal access, having a proper gradient ramp, the handrails, the assisted toilets, and not to forget the rights of both patients as well as the staff, in terms of privacy, confidentiality, and even the working conditions and environment that is required. This brings me to a case study, wherein in one of the hospitals we had the kitchen in the basement, and technically it was a lower ground. So lower ground is the area where kitchen is permitted, and there was a technical glitch that was flouted for this qualification. Regulatory, that means. Now we all know it's like the elephant in the room that it is a fire hazard, and the management was keen to take a positive step on this. So there's a lot of discussion on this, and the biggest challenge was the space crunch. So what we tried to do was, and it's a very simple thing, but it is just a matter of application that was done. We tried to break down the work process and the space utilization, and we found out that the 75% of space in the kitchen is for non-cooking activities like storages, pre-cook, washing of utensils, and storages, and things like that. It was only 25% of the area that was the gas area, or the cooking area that was there. And we did some internal layout changing, where we relocated this cooking area on the ground floor to the ground floor, which actually took care of the high hazard. Whereas for operationally we made an internal connection, but very important was that we made a fire barrier, because the ground was actually directly connected to the lower ground. Some operational changes in terms of batch activities, you cannot keep on transporting material. So we had batch activities for the kitchen internally, and strict timings that were to be followed. So this was definitely a compromise, but this was far better than having the kitchen offsite, wherein you would have pre-prepared food brought to the hospital. So this is somehow we try to achieve efficiency and compromise by some internal relocation and application of functions. That's it. That's my time. I'll see you at the other end of the webinar for your Q&A sessions. Back to Julia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachin. So as we all know, hospital construction has lots of requirements, multiple requirements, and lots of things need to be taken into consideration. And Dr. Sachin just proved this with the examples in his presentation. So how to approach these things, how to decide where we can compromise and where we cannot compromise, because basically we understand that many of the hospitals are not perfect because they are in converted buildings, because the scope of service was expanded at certain point, and there are too many services provided in one area, which is a risk, as Dr. Sachin mentioned. And basically the idea is provide no harm. So how do we approach the situation, and how do we realize where we can compromise and where we cannot cut corners? I would personally suggest use the worst case scenario approach. And with those hospitals with whom we worked, you know what it means. It means projecting, developing in your mind what potentially can happen if. And then imagining different consequences, usually negative, and thinking how your staff or patients are exposed to danger in this case, exactly as in the case study that Dr. Sachin described with the kitchen. Then you will find a way to improve, and you will find a solution which will help you, on the one hand, keep safety of your staff and patients, but at the same time use the area in the most efficient way. But if you realize that such areas as fire safety or infection control or gases or radiation is involved, this area requires a lot of attention, and this is the area where you shouldn't really compromise. So kitchen, of course, it has heat and sometimes it has gas. So these risks need to be considered. But if your kitchen doesn't use the services, if it's just a canteen where you sort food, then it's less risk. So basically, the more risky procedure is taking place in this area, the more attention it requires. Of course, if you make one consultation room for the doctor 1 or 2 meters less than the requirement, the risk is lower. If you try to cut corners in the operating theater or in your sterilization unit, not using the unidirectional flow, for instance, which is a key requirement, in this case, your risk is higher. So basically use common sense, use worst case scenario, and think about possible scenarios in your various areas. Now you will hear more inspiring examples from our 2 other speakers. And the next speaker is Dr. Muataz, who is our assessor. You probably met him during our assessments before, but also he is Chief Medical Director in the hospital, Children Cancer Hospital in Egypt. Dr. Muataz, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, thank you, Julia. And I'd like also to thank the IFC team for inviting me to be with you today. I would like also to thank Dr. Sachin for his very insightful and very informative presentation. I will share my screen now.
Dr. Sachin, can you please stop sharing? Thanks.
So perhaps a very logical question to ask yourself after learning about the requirements and the codes that Dr. Sachin has explained to us now is, what if for any reason I cannot comply with such codes or requirements? Is there something that I can do? And what should I do? How should I do it? And why should I do it? The next part of the session is dedicated to answer this question. Hi, my name is Muataz Zemeti. I am based in Cairo, Egypt. I am part of the IFC healthcare quality team. I'm also currently serving as the Chief Medical Officer at Children Cancer Hospital Egypt, publicly known as 57357. I'll start firstly with an overview. So it's quite clear to you now that in order to obtain or keep your accreditation or licensing status, healthcare facilities must comply with lots of codes and meet other requirements. And these requirements or codes cover many areas of the facility, including mechanical, electrical, plumbing, elevators, other infrastructure requirements, and even the general upkeep of the facility is factored in as well, as of course Dr. Sachin has explained to us. So such codes and requirements are actually very important because they have considerable impact on the quality of the service provided by the healthcare facility, in addition to individual safety, including patient safety and environmental safety as well. What makes such codes and requirements challenging, complying with such codes and requirements challenging, is not only the importance. In addition, complying with these requirements involves considerable challenges that include the direct expense or the cost for the engineering works, the material, the systems that your organization will have to purchase and acquire in order to comply with such codes. And of course, the time required for implementation. And there is an implied cost here that's related to the time required for implementation, which is the cost of lost opportunity, which is the cost that you will, the cost for the time that your organization will stop its operation until such engineering works or installing of these systems are done. This is a very important item that should be factored in your budget when you're calculating the budget required for these projects. Of course, additional significance arises for these challenges when the facilities are already operational, which means if your hospital is already operational, it's not a new hospital, and you identified that you need to implement a project to comply with any code or requirement, you will have to stop operating for a while. And this is why the cost of lost opportunity, as I explained, is a very important factor that has to be taken into consideration. A very important concept to highlight as well is that in order to keep the facilities safe and operational, your approach, your mindset has to go beyond than just fixing what's broken. You need to be, as Julia was explaining to us, you need to be ahead of what could go wrongly. So this will take us to the logical question. What if, for any reason, you cannot implement these required innovations or system changes? Can I do something meanwhile? And the answer is, you have to. It's a must. You must do something meanwhile. So what can you do? Allow me to introduce you to a concept that has been added recently. It's not a new concept, but it was added recently to the last PCI standards manual, which is the interim measures. The interim measures are temporary actions that should be taken to ensure the safety of the building's occupants during times when features of the systems for fire safety or other systems are missing, defective, compromised, or inoperable. And these interim measures may be implemented to ensure, this must be implemented actually to ensure the safety of occupants until improvements or repairs can be completed. And the hospital should determine when and to what extent these interim measures will be implemented. What I would like to highlight here, that by definition, such measures that you will take until you comply with the codes and requirements are only temporary. They are not a substitute for the codes or the requirements. So what's the framework? What's the process or the mindset that you should follow in order to apply such temporary measures? Here is the high impact areas first. It's a very interesting article shared by Matt Key. He is the Vice President for Operations in MedExcel in the United States. He has proposed a very interesting and very useful framework or process that you should approach whenever you have any challenges complying with any codes or requirements in your facility. And it's very systematic and methodological. The first step is you should document all the components, all the different components that constitute your building, that constitute your facility. You have to be very thorough and very comprehensive in this step in order not to miss an important component of your facility management system. You should include all the elements that you see, the tangible ones, the roofs, the walls, the elevators, the floors, everything. And you should never miss the ones that are hidden, which include the mechanical, electrical, the air conditioning system, other core systems, including the fire system, your IT system, everything. So the first step should be identifying all the components that make up the building. The next step would be thoroughly evaluating each and every single component of your facility to determine which of these are compromised, which of these are not complying. And of course, applying risk management concepts to identify which ones have the highest priority. And then you should prioritize your budget accordingly. While doing this assessment and evaluation, you would probably want to replace the systems or the components that have the most impact on your patient and your business, and the components that drive revenue to your facilities, and the ones that hugely affect compliance to regulatory requirements. And what I would like to do now is to share some examples for such temporary measures that are evidence-based and are published. Before starting sharing these examples, I would like to highlight again that all these measures are not a substitute for the codes or the requirements. They are only temporary measures that you should start doing immediately until you are able to comply with the codes and the requirements for safety. I would like firstly to start from the JCI manual. The JCI has introduced a new section for interim measures when your fire safety system is compromised for any reason. I have selected some examples from the interim measures they have included. The first one is a process that should be initiated by a hospital whenever the fire detection system is compromised anywhere in the building for any reason. What the hospital should do immediately is to start a fire watch, which includes an individual or a team who is trained on this process to patrol the areas that are of higher risk to get fire. For example, if you have any warehouse that includes many combustible material, this should be included in your fire watch patrols. Another interim measure includes providing a temporary but equivalent fire alarm system for use when your fire system is impaired in a section or an area in your hospital. And of course, whenever needed, whenever your system is compromised, you should consider adding additional manual firefighting equipments and training your staff to use them. Other examples from the GCI interim measures include using temporary construction partitions that are smoke tight and made of non-combustible materials in order to limit the spread of fire if any happens. And of course, whenever your fire system is compromised or not established yet, you should increase surveillance of buildings, grounds, and equipment, and giving special attention to construction and storage areas and any other area that is identified by your risk management team as high risk of fire. Of course, this will require additional training to staff on the use of such new systems and on the new firefighting equipment. Again, before going to the next example, these measures are not a substitute or an alternative for having a standardized fire management system. These are only temporary measures that you should immediately start implementing until your fire system is fixed or implemented. The next example I selected has to do with temporary isolation rooms. This is one of the key challenges for many hospitals now who do not have an appropriate number of isolation rooms in their hospital. And we have seen some hospitals as well that do not have isolation rooms at all. So the state of Minnesota has a very interesting and very useful guide for what you can do, what are the alternatives you can have until you can implement a standardized isolation room. And it consists of two components. The first is you try to make temporary negative pressure isolation in your isolation rooms. Of course, such rooms has to be single bedrooms. You cannot have more than one patient inside this room, and it has to have a window and has to have access to a private bathroom. So the temporary negative pressure room is considered whenever airborne infection isolation is needed in case of outbreaks, and there are no available or insufficient standardized isolation rooms in the hospital. The temporary isolation rooms are designed to protect patients and staff from contracting or transmitting infectious diseases. And it's very important to take into consideration fire safety and other engineering considerations when you're implementing such temporary systems in order not to fix something and then cause a problem or a higher risk at other aspects. This is a diagram that explains one of the tools to implement a temporary negative isolation room. This one uses a HEPA filter, a HEPA machine that contains a HEPA filter and a duct that is connected to the window. Of course, the exhaust or the return inside the room has to be sealed in order to implement such a system. This HEPA machine has two purposes. It cleans contaminated air from the room, and as well it induces negative pressure in the room. And the advantage of such system is that it's temporary. You can use it for whenever needed, and then get back to your normal operation whenever the use stops. Another component for isolation rooms is the anti-room. Many of the isolation rooms we see now in the time of the pandemic do not have the requirement for the anti-room. And there is a concept in the same guideline, which published by the state of Minnesota, which is the portable anti-rooms. The portable anti-rooms have many advantages, including they require no manipulation of the existing room ventilation, making it easier to set up, and it's convenient use because any chosen or selected room can be converted into an isolation room using these portable anti-rooms. It has some disadvantages as well, because you will be unable to move the beds through the door, and they do not depressurize the room unless the room door is open. This diagram illustrates how the portable anti-room is set up. Of course, there is a HEPA filtered machine. It has to be perfectly sealed. It's placed in front of the main door for the room, and this can be used temporarily until you can set up and implement your standardized isolation room. The third example I would like to share is for a case review. It's for a hospital that's a 40-bed hospital in a facility that was originally a residential building. It was not designed from the beginning to be a hospital, and there were only 2 elevators in the facility. This created a big challenge because there was no dedicated utility elevator in the hospital. The hospital has implemented some process controls in order to overcome this, where they set up and scheduled dedicated times for utility use in one of the elevators. This schedule was known to all staff working in the hospital, and after each single use for the utility inside this dedicated elevator, disinfection and deep cleaning were done after each use. So again, and before concluding my presentation, the main concept here is to such measures, such terms are not an alternative or a substitute for the codes or the requirements. They are only temporary, and what you should do is that you should identify all the elements and the components of your facility and determine which of these require an immediate intervention. And there are lots of resources that can help you, many alternatives that you can do, and you should start immediately doing one of these temporary solutions until your permanent solution is ready. Thank you so much. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you so much, Muattas, for these great examples and real case studies, because the areas that you described, fire safety, lack of isolation room, or lack of additional technical elevator, I think these are very common problems. We see lots of them when we go to the facilities and do our assessment. We often hear, we didn't go for accreditation. We didn't start patient safety because we have infrastructure challenges that we cannot overcome. Our fire system is not working. We don't have a fire detecting system installed. That's why we will never be able to improve our healthcare quality, and that's why we don't start. Here you can see real examples that no obstacle is an excuse, and many things which relate to infrastructure challenges, at least temporarily, can be solved and compensated by processes. And again, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the areas which relate to infection control, that relate to fire safety, should not be compromised, because these are slow ticking bombs. And when you leave them unattended and without your attention, you basically increase the risk of harm to your patients and staff, the consequences of which can be crucial and terrible for the facility. So even if you cannot afford a full change of the fire system now, compensate by processes. As Dr. Muattas said, you can have a fire patrol, you can have domestic alarms used temporarily, but there are multiple solutions and nothing is an excuse. I wanted to stress this fact once again. And more inspiring examples will come from our next speaker. This is Dr. Abdallah Sharaf, also from Egypt, regional operation director in Maghrabi hospitals. So Dr. Abdallah, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I would like first to thank the IFC and all the team for this opportunity. I would like to thank Dr. Shaheen and Dr. Muattas for their inspiring presentations. Actually, let me first introduce myself briefly. My name is Dr. Abdallah Sharaf. I am Regional Director of Maghrabi Hospitals in Egypt. I am a physician with management degrees, and then I worked with in the private and in the government sector. Let me first introduce you to our story today. In Maghrabi hospitals, we have around 32 facilities. We have been there for 60 years. We've been working with the IFC closely in the last decade. Let me tell you that Egypt has introduced a new healthcare universal system for all its citizens. So we had to start in a government called Port Said. One day I had a call from the Minister of Health of Egypt, Dr. Hala Zaid, and she told me, Abdallah, you have this opportunity to help us in creating a center of excellence for ophthalmology, which is actually the field of Maghrabi hospitals in Port Said. So let us start our story and our journey together. Okay, so as I told you, we are talking today about an example in Port Said Ophthalmology Hospital. First of all, let me go through the definition of infrastructure, which is a very general term for any basic physical system in a business, in a region, in a nation. And examples include transportation, communication, sewage, water, electrical systems, others. These systems tend to be capital intensive and high cost investments. So actually, they are very expensive to be done, but they are very crucial too. Our case today, we had a hospital of ophthalmology in Port Said. It's owned by the government. It's almost 100 years ago. It's not actually built as a hospital. The call came, we are going live after 4 months. So it's a time-oriented project. We have to renovate the whole hospital or do something different because there is a new health insurance system announced. They have a limitation for the budget. We have a very high expected volume of patients coming, new services to be introduced. So actually what we have done at that moment was the basic functions of management. We have visited the place. We have seen and analyzed what we have right now. And then we have put a plan for change. This plan was actually, we had to use all the resources available, including funding agents like IFC, including consultancies to help us move forward. So, first of all, we have set all the stakeholders for the project. We sit together, we decide to cooperate, we use the proper consultation. We have to consider three very basic items. I would like to thank Dr. Mu'taz for outlining the term of opportunity cost, because the cost and the time and the priorities for any project are the most important items that you should consider. Well, the renovation plan we had 3 buildings to renovate. Each building had a very separate function. So we had this building for administrative services, we had this building for OPD, we had this building for surgeries and the inpatient. We had to make a new patient circulation, including these 3 separate buildings. We had to introduce new clinics and new services as investigations and otherwise, improve the functions and the efficacy of the existing facilities, and implement all required licensing and registration standards and requirements. So all the hospital infrastructure had to be renovated, actually. Electrical, water, sewage, air conditioning, communication, civil defense, elevator, medical gases, you name it. Even the IT system was introduced, all the medical equipment was to be renovated. This project was a very, very important project because this is the first city to implement the universal health care in Egypt. This is a very important project for the country. This group of personnel that we are going to train and we are going to renovate the hospital are actually going to be the trainers for the whole country in the field of ophthalmology. So we had to do the job right. As I told you, we have to go through every single detail. We have to know exactly where the defects are and to look into all possible solutions, even creative ones. Let me just jump into a small thing here. If you look here, you will see the number of patients, which here we had to close totally in order to do the renovation, which this is the opportunity cost that Dr. Mu'taz is talking about. And then the numbers started to grow again. Let me take you through the pictures, which is going to be very illustrative. This is the picture of the before, and this is the pictures of the after. This is a building built 100 years ago. No air conditioning system, no fire alarm, no fire exit, nothing. And we have to finalize everything within. So if you get the proper consultation, if you get the proper funding solutions, you will always find a reasonable. This is the outpatient clinic, and this is after the renovation. Let me show you. This is a waiting area before, and this is the waiting area after. This, if you look here, this is the same corridor, by the way, but this is before and this is after, of course. And this is a picture of one of the clinics before and after. Also, I would like to show you, this is a picture of one of the clinics before and after. One of the inpatient rooms before and after. Of course, the difference is quite obvious. And here, this is, for example, the store for the pharmaceutical consumables. This is before and after. And here is the main work that we have done. This is the security room monitoring room, where you have all the cameras during the hospital. This, of course, was introduced during that. Here you find the emergency stairs that we have built outside the building in order to accommodate the needs of the civil defense. Of course, you'll find the medical gases. This is new, and this is the electrical system, which is also new, including everything. This is, for example, the emergency water tank. We had to find a place to build it, so we built it in the garden. Let me tell you that if you look into all the pictures that we have shown to you, as all our presenters today have said, you have to meet all the requirements, infection control and the requirement of licensing, requirement of safety for your patients in order to achieve the right and the proper way to present your services to your patients. Don't compensate on any standard, on any regulation needed, because it will affect the safety of your patient and it might affect your safety as well. I would like to thank you all for listening to my presentation, and I'll move back to Julie. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. So the lesson that we learned from this great example is that everything is possible with proper planning of the project. If you think about extension, if you think about the changing of scope of services, if you just want to make an older facility look nicer and also be more efficient from the point of view of modern standards, try your best and seek for the expertise. Good planning is the key, is the basement for safer practices. We also saw in our experience great examples how fragmented layout, say in Latin America or in Africa, was converted into a solid building with some passages or even like glass dome, and meets modern requirements, global best practice, becomes safe for patients and staff, and processes are much easier in that facility, and it's easier to become compliant with the requirements of patient safety and also to get accredited, because many of the hospitals want to get stamp of approval at certain point, although we of course should remember that all these improvements are not for the sake of accreditation, but rather to create the culture of quality. Now we are starting, thanks a lot to our speakers once again, we are starting question and answer session. Please ask your questions to our experts in chat. And also using the question and answer button at the bottom of the panel. And we already have some questions that arrived. And the first question relates to the interim measures that Dr. Muataz mentioned in his presentation. How long can we use these interim measures? How long would you recommend to use these interim measures? Is there any deadline? And also maybe our experts can say something about a conditional accreditation from their experience. Dr. Muataz, I'm sure you will have something to share regarding this. Thanks a lot.
Actually, the question should be when you should start implementing these interim measures. And the answer to this is you should start immediately. Whenever you identify a gap or a major non-compliance with any of your codes or safety requirements, then you should start immediately implementing the most suitable interim measure for your organization. When you should stop implementing them is when you start implementing the original requirement. So you should not rely on these for a long time. These are only temporary measures. You should stop whenever you are ready to implement the original code or standard of safety.
Thank you so much. Any other speakers want to add something to this question, maybe based on their experience? Or we will move on. And the next question relates to the conversion of the hotels to hospitals. Also, maybe Dr. Sachin, Dr. Abdullah, you can say something from your experience. Is it successful conversion? Are they compatible to other medical facilities which are purpose-built? And what are the challenges for hospitals being converted to hospitals that need to be addressed and taken into consideration?
Okay. That's a good and quite a relevant question in today's time. In fact, we saw the pandemic, hit the hotel industry the most, and there was a lot of distress in the industry as such. And there were, avenues that people were looking at, trying to do away with the hotels and trying to get them converted. And the best possible fact that anybody would think about converting a hotel is, the hospital. So in today's time, it is quite relevant. But now I've myself been involved in conversion of at least 3 hotels into hospital buildings, and there was one convention center that we did. But by and large, though it depends typically on the on each and every individual facility, but it is a myth that hotels are equivalent to hospitals, because what may maximum match is the inpatient rooms, okay, and the back of the house departments, like your change rooms, your maintenance, your engineering services, and the back of the house matters, and a very small element of the front house, front of the house facilities like registration, billing, and so on and so forth. The inpatient area that we think about in the rooms, is, if we analyze a hospital and do the space breakdown, it's only around 30% of the space that is taken up by the rooms. The remaining of the area, besides your back of the house, is for your accident emergency, your OPDs, your diagnostics in terms of your radiology facilities, X-ray, CT scans, MRIs, and you may even have nuclear medicine departments. Not to forget your operation theaters, your ICUs, your CSSD, so on and so forth. So there is, by and large, if not less, at least 50% variance in the space allocation. Complicating this matter is again the segregated circulations that hospitals need, as we spoke about a short while back. What we also saw was that hotels have a lot of levels. There are some stairs leading to a particular level. Then again, there are stairs. Which are quite a challenge for a hospital per se. And the other couple of things are from the RCC, or the structural point of view from the hotels, is one about the floor heights. Because operation theater would typically require a 14 feet height, or maybe even your MRIs would require at least 11 to 12 feet height, to be comfortably placed. And last but not the least is the elevators. Like I spoke about in the presentation, you have outpatient visitors separate from your inpatients and your critical care, your accident emergency. Getting that switch in a hotel is a little bit challenging, though it can be solved, and it has been addressed at a few places. But by and large, what we would want to say is that everything will have to be worked out. It is not that easy conversion if we are looking at a accreditation compatible hospital per se. I hope that answers.
Thank you so much. It was very detailed question, Dr. Sachin. And once we started talking about conversion, maybe our speakers can give some tips for hospitals that are located in residential buildings, because it's another challenge that we see globally. So what advice you can give to these hospitals to make them safer for the patients and for the staff?
See, if we are talking about residential buildings, now residential buildings, again, the same problems would arise. Primarily speaking, you would have the floor heights. In residences, heights are not more than 10 feet. And again, in a residential building, it is a typical floor. So your ground floor would, your topmost floor is same as your ground floor. You have the same, the toilet at the same location. You have the ducts at the same location. You have the entry to the flats at the same location. So at the end of it, it ultimately boils down to what is the RCC, because internally the walls will not make any relevance. It is the columns and the beams that will make relevance, but it is very, very difficult. If it's a very small facility, up to say 5,000 or 10,000 square feet max, it's okay, But beyond that, it is literally not possible, because it will lead to a lot of breakages.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Sachin. So Matas, Abdullah, maybe something from you on this point, because in Egypt there are lots of different types of conversions. So maybe something from your experience on this point.
Sure. Let me tell you about the main problem that I think that arises if we can use a building that was not actually built as a hospital or as a medical facility would be two things. First of all, would be, as Dr. Shine said, that the building actually is not designed for the patient circulation, for the proper patient circulation. And the second thing is the level of service that we would like to present in this building or this facility. Here in Egypt, we have this in most of the new of the old hospitals that are built or located in residential buildings. And I think the Ministry of Health have introduced a program for re-accreditation of such facilities that would be introduced through 10 years. Gradual improvement plan for each facility would be presented by the facility management to make sure that all the regulations and all the standards that should be followed to improve patient safety and improve the infection control possibilities are followed. So if we are talking about a building that is not actually designed as a hospital or as a medical facility, I would think that, first of all, if we would not start it, that would be better. But if it's there, we have to think of a solution to improve gradually the infection control measures there, to improve the quality of service presented there, to improve the patient circulation, because most of this building will be, as Dr. Shaheen had said, will be built in a totally different manner than hospitals. So actually, we have to modify the patient circulation, maybe the walls, the corridors, everything, in order to accommodate the beds of the patients and the movement through the corridors and things like that. So this is the main objectives that we have to put in mind during these renovations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Thank you, Dr. Sachin. I would like to add something to this question regarding the clinics inside the residential buildings. The answer is should relate to which code or which requirement, safety requirement that is compromised because of this setup that you have. And your reply to this question should guide you on what you should do. You should apply a rule whenever you can, your organization can correct this, apply infrastructural interventions to make things right, then you should do it. If not, you should look for the appropriate process control or process alternative. For an example, I know of a hospital or actually a multi-clinics center in Egypt that had a huge challenge with its waiting area during the spread and outbreak of COVID. Because the waiting area was very small, it was not properly ventilated, and it could not fit all the patients waiting for their physician examination. They did something, a process, they introduced a new process. It was very nice and very effective. They made the registration system and the booking system on a mobile application where patients did not need to be physically available inside the waiting area. They asked every patient to stay in their car, and whenever it's their turn, the mobile application instantly sends them an alarm. So this is just a small example of how you can apply a temporary system whenever you identify what is really wrong with which safety consideration is compromised. So I'm not recommending all of the clinics to do this. This is just an example.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Motas. This is actually a very inspiring example, and I think it can give inspiration and develop some other practices which might be useful, not specifically borrowing this advice, but just thinking Creatively and creativity and proactiveness. These are the words that we already used today when we were thinking about improving infrastructure, because it's a challenge. Of course, it's a challenge and it requires creativity. Now it's going to be a very tricky question of which relates. An answer is difficult to find, and COVID proved this fact. If it's a standalone building, infection control is an issue, but we can understand how to solve it. There is separate entrance, there is a chance to screen patients at the entrance, etc., etc. And what if the facility is part of a residential building or a medical building, but occupies just one floor without direct access to the street? How to solve the issue of infection control, screening patients, isolating patients in such a facility? Maybe some tips or advice for our audience? Dr. Abdullah, Dr. Sachin, maybe you can give some advice?
Yeah. Yeah, in residential facilities, like you said, maybe at one particular floor, you restrict the clinical or medical activities. It is by far, practically possible at areas where people have less chances of infection, or maybe the patients are more of a surgical elective type. To give you an example, it would be more of like a ophthalmology center, wherein you have cataract surgeries, or you have LASIK surgeries, LASIK procedures to take out the refraction error. So these are people who are not necessarily infected, or these are not infectious patients, but most of these are elective. Again, quite a bit of it to do with cosmetology. But typically, as we all say, universal precautions like you have to assume that the other person could be, HIV or HBsAg. Similarly, in today's COVID times, you have to assume that the other person might be positive. So that's the universal precaution norm that we live with. But otherwise, it would be the cold cases that one could probably tackle rather than handling frank infectious cases in such facilities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachin. So again, the issue of interim and permanent measures, just for clarification for our audience, say there are fire exits and they are cluttered. And if the medical facility declutters the access to these fire exits and removes all obstructions, would it be an interim measure or a permanent measure?
Julia, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. So say the access to the fire doors, to the fire exits, is obstructed by some clutter, and the hospital decides to declutter it. Would it be a temporary measure or an interim measure? Or permanent measure?
So removing obstacles is a must. Whenever you have obstacles that prevent access, direct and rapid access to your emergency exits, this is a must. And whenever you can do this, I think this could be considered as a permanent measure, because you can never have any obstacle in your corridors leading to emergency exit doors or in front of the emergency exit doors. This is one of the most important codes and standards in a hospital.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Motas, for this explanation. I think it's more just to illustrate once again the example of interim and permanent measures, but I would say it's an emergency measure number one. So declutter and make them free, your fire exit doors, as soon as possible, and always keep them like that. By the way, speaking about clutter, we often see, for instance, unused equipment in the corridors of the operating theater and lots of other furniture or equipment stored in the corridors. Even if these corridors do not lead straight to the fire exits, always remove clutter from the doorways. This is a critical measure. So another Another question actually is a question I think specifically to Dr. Sachin. When we are talking about hospital planning, when we are talking about construction and reconstruction, are there any resources that you can recommend to consult? Maybe there are any hospital code guidelines published that can be used for this purpose. Of course, expertise is required, but maybe hospitals can start learning some materials by themselves.
Correct. Yeah. So to begin with, first and foremost is the local regulation or the local norms that preside over a particular plot of land before designing. Having said that, like for example, there's one hospital that we are doing where which is close to the airport. So it has 3 levels below in the basement and only 2 levels above ground. So local conditions would prevail. But as far as guidelines are concerned, first and foremost, WHO has guidelines for specific departments. Your CDC has guidelines for a few infection control and from intensive care point of view. The American Institute of Architects also has a Facility Guideline Institute document, which categorically mentions the designing methodologies that need to be adopted for designing of hospitals. And various countries have their own as far as the developed countries are concerned. So probably you could have something from the Europe, and you also have Australian guidelines for designing of hospitals. So this could be a good start to begin with.
Thanks a lot. This is super useful. Also, we mentioned today that energy efficient building may not necessarily be operationally efficient. I'm literally reading word by word the question. Why is that? Let's explain.
Correct. Sure. Thanks a lot. This statement I made this statement because there is a myth, that once the building is, say, energy efficient, or it's a certified building, or it is a green building, it is assumed that it is operationally efficient, which is not the case, because energy efficient would apply to a building irrespective of what function or business it does there. It could be it could be a hotel, or it could be a shopping mall also, and not necessarily a hospital. What we are targeting here is the hospital-specific operational functionalities that need to be taken care of while functioning of the hospital. Staff manpower is the biggest, cost center for the hospital, and it's a fixed cost. You can't remove the staff just because your occupancy is low. So the staff, the fixed costs, that implication on the operations based on the design, is more important operationally to keep the business functioning in an efficient manner as compared. And green buildings would actually target a very different zone. Both are important because in today's times we definitely need good control of sunlight affecting the air conditioning inside, because most of the hospitals today are centrally air conditioned, and you need to keep a tab on the energy efficiency of the hospital. But both are two different ball games, which is why we try to highlight that separately.
Thank you very much. Once we started to look for clarification of our speaker set today, there is a question for Dr. Abdallah, who mentioned the new laws which might be issued by the Egyptian government. And the question is this already defined as a coming law, or is it just a discussion, just a suggestion?
No, it's actually right now part of the General Authority for Regulations that is formed and headed by Dr. Ashraf Ismail in Egypt, and it's actually in the preparation phase still, but there is some registration standards already available on the website of this authority organization web page. This is provided here in Egypt, and you can find resources on the Egyptian Health Ministry website too.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Abdallah. So I think we're running out of time. So unfortunately, we will have to conclude for today. Thanks a lot to our great speakers. We believe that the examples and the requirements they described were useful for you. Thanks a lot to our audience and asking your questions. We hope that the answers of our experts were useful and you will start quality improvement and patient safety activity already tomorrow. And also we realized that no infrastructure challenge is an obstacle for starting the quality improvement work, no excuse, and everything, even temporarily, can be compensated by a process. We will look forward for you to join our upcoming webinars. We will announce them separately. And once again, thank you very much and goodbye for today.
Please, my usual request is to fill out the survey on exit or send us your feedback in an email or in any way that's convenient for you. Please do not log out before completing the survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin. Thank you,
Thanks
Dr.
a lot.
Abdullah.